welcome to the program. I am DEJI360 EPP. Now, the government appears determined this time to follow through with its plan to remove the controversial petrol subsidy, which is costing the country so much. Before now, the government has said the petrol subsidy will go by June this year. And as that date draws near, it has announced that it has secured an $800 million facility from the World Bank to use as palliatives to cushion the effects of the subsidy removal on citizens. The plan is that the money would be disbursed to vulnerable and poor families across the country as part of the palliatives. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed disclosed this last Wednesday while addressing State House correspondents after the Federal Executive Council meeting. Take a listen now to more of what she said.
When we're working on the 2023 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and the Appropriation Act, we made that provision to enable us exit fuel subsidy by June 2023. We're on course. We're having different stakeholder engagements. We've secured some funding from the World Bank. That is the first tranche of palliatives that will be that will enable us give cash transfers to the most vulnerable in our society that have now been registered in a national social register. $100 million for the national scale-up of the National Social Investment Program at the World Bank. And it's secured, it's ready for disbursement.
Well, joining me on the program now to speak more on this is the Managing Director, Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu, who joins us from Abia. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Thanks a lot for your time. But let me ask you this. What do you make of this $800 million facility? At the moment, we do not know whether it's a loan or a grant, but it's a lot of money that we're going to use to fight subsidy removal.
Thank you, Deji, for having me. I don't think it's going to be a loan. I think it's like a grant. You know, the World Bank and IMF have been indicating interest in supporting the Nigerian government to take out the subsidy, because the subsidy has not been of much benefit to the society, to the larger society of Nigeria, to the larger populace. So I believe that the 800 million is a grant. But beyond that, the first thing we have to look at that the government budget for this year, if we sustain the subsidy, they're going to be about $13 billion, about 6.7 trillion naira. And the government officials have said that we are spending about 440 billion naira on a monthly basis to subsidize petrol, PMS, fuel. So the $800 million is just a drop in auction. But the key thing for me is that the government has to come up with a well-articulated plan on how to cushion the impact of subsidy. I've been an apostle consistently that the government cannot sustain a subsidy. But I'm also conscious of the fact that subsidy removal will have some negative impact on the society, particularly the most vulnerable in the society. So I think beyond the fact that World Bank is giving the government about $800 million to cushion, to apply to support the most vulnerable in the society, we need to have a well-thought-out program to deal with the fallout of the subsidy so that we don't end up with a policy that will badly affect the most vulnerable.
You don't think the plan to give is it monthly cash handouts now to the vulnerable in society, as the government plans to do it? You don't think that's enough?
Well, with the first you ask yourself, how much is $800 million in terms of giving a handout to the most vulnerable in the society? From the register, the registrar of people who are most vulnerable, I think they have more than 10 million people there.
Yes.
So if you want to get $800 million to the 10 million people, that's about $80
It's even more than 10 million. The minister said 10 million households, but altogether about 50 million persons.
So if you're talking about 50 million persons and you're talking about $800,000, so it's a pittance. And then the most vulnerable will need that support on a monthly basis for some time to win them of the pressure that will come from the subsidy. So like what I was saying, previously the government had come up with a clear plan, issues of providing public transport systems, subsidizing public transport systems, issues of conditional cash transfer to the most vulnerable. I have advocated that we should have what they call cost of living allowance to those at the lower rung of the civil service and public service, as well as private sector employees, so that those people at very, very low income levels can get a cost of living allowance to support them for a number of months. And then for those in private employment, so for those in self-employment that are in very low income, the government should also have another method of supporting them, providing them either seed capital to support their businesses or providing monthly allowances. But it has to also be phased out. It has to be determined. You have to determine the time you phase it out. Then you have to look at issues around transport system. The major challenge that people have with the subsidy is that it will lead to an uptick or upsurge in transport costs. So the government had in the past planned to provide public transport systems that will make it possible for people to commute within the cities and intra-city movements at lower cost. I have not heard anything like that. All I've heard is that the government did not take out the subsidy, which I support, but I also believe that the government needs to come out with a clear plan on how to deal with the most vulnerable. It's beyond the fact that a multilateral agency like the World Bank is supporting us. What have we done as a country to think through that process and plan to support ourselves? For me, it's biggest logic that all we are hearing now is that the World Bank has provided $800 million to support Nigeria. But what has the Nigerian government plan to cushion the impact of the subsidy removal on the most vulnerable? That's what we should be discussing. Because a handout is a handout. No country will ever survive on a handout. Countries survive and prosper because they have a well thought out, well articulated, well planned, and well managed economic policies that lead to economic growth and economic opportunities for the most vulnerable in the society.
Now, let me ask you this. As we speak today, local refining is still not happening. The Dangote refinery is not in operation yet, even though the expectation is that it will come into operation soon. We don't know if that's going to happen before June. And of course, we know that the government is fixing some of its own refineries, like the Warri refinery, for instance. But then local refining has actually not. Would it be wise now to remove this subsidy without having local refining first?
No, local refinery will never come up until you have the subsidy removed. The reason why we have issued multiple licenses for refineries, and none of them has come, almost none of them has become operational, maybe about 2 or 3 have become operational, is because the subsidy does not support a situation where people can buy crude at a commercial rate, produce or refine the crude, and wait for government to buy the crude from them at a subsidized rate and sell to the public. Because once you have that, you're going to live at the mercy of the government officials who may not like your face and may not buy your products. And if you don't buy your product, you're dead on arrival. So that's why refineries will not come up until we have the subsidy removed. Subsidies removal must come before the refineries will come up. But the key thing for me is that in the interim, while we're waiting for the local refineries to come up, that there is a method, a system, a well-thought, well-developed system to manage the fallout, particularly to the most vulnerable. One of the things I always believe when you talk of removal of subsidy or the impact as it relates to whether Dangote refinery will solve the problem is that we must also bear in mind that Dangote refinery will buy crude at international market prices. And if Dangote refinery buys crude at international market prices, Dangote refinery will sell refined products to the local market at international market prices. And because Nigeria does not own the entire crude, but if Nigeria decides to sell crude to Dangote refinery and in Naira, Nigeria will never have enough foreign exchange earnings to meet other international obligations. So we should perish the thought that Dangote refinery is a silver bullet that solves all the problems as it relates to availability of refined petroleum products at lower costs. The key thing for me is that we must develop an approach to dealing with the most vulnerable. In the long run, if we take out the subsidy, the medium to the long run, the refinery will come up, local refinery will come up, and then ultimately, locally refined product will come at a price that is lower than imported refined petroleum product, because we're going to eliminate some of the costs that lead to the current price of refined petroleum product. Issues like freight charges, issues like insurance, issues like lead time financing costs it takes to take crude from Nigeria to overseas and bring them back, issues of refining it with foreign labor, which is higher, which is more expensive. These things will be eliminated. We're going to have products that will be at the pump head at prices below what they are today. So we're going to have an elevated price at the initial instance, but in the medium to long term, once local refineries will come in, then we should have lower prices.
I was actually going to ask you that, because I know you're a staunch apostle of subsidy removal, but you know that those who are against it are saying, look, the moment you remove it, the price of petrol will go up. We've seen suggestions of around 750 naira per liter. And what people are wondering is, for people like you, what assurance would you be giving people out there, those who are against this subsidy removal, that prices will eventually come down?
Okay, before I take that question, I want to mention the fact that today you also mentioned in your earlier question that the government is making efforts to reactivate or revive existing refineries. I think that is throwing good money against bad money. Those refineries have gone beyond their useful life. Their FCC, the flue catalytic cracking devices, FCCD, are obsolete. They are no longer in tandem with today's technology. So if we continue to throw money at those refineries, Port Harcourt refineries, Warri refineries, Kaduna refineries, we're just wasting that money. If you cast your mind back to the former Minister of State for Petroleum, Dr. Ibekachukwu, he had made commitments to the country multiple times that if we don't get the refineries working, that he was going to scrap them. The refineries are not yet scrapped, and we are still spending money on trying to reactivate them. I think we should perish that thought and focus on deregulating the market, creating palliatives for those who will be most vulnerably affected. The money we're using to fix the refineries, we should use to create those palliatives, and ultimately bring in private capital to go into the downstream sector and the oil and gas sector. But back to the second question you asked, I'm going to use a live example that many of us are living witnesses to. For those of you who have been around for the past 30 years or thereabout, if you cast your mind back to when GSM was introduced to this country, prior to that, the tariff that NITEL was charging was an insignificant amount of what the GSM started charging. The GSM started charging 150 naira per minute of airtime when they started. If you also recall that 150 naira per minute was more than $1 per minute, and that was multiple times what NITEL was charging. But what has happened today? Today, what is the airtime per second? We've gone to per second billing. We have gotten to a point where you pay less than 4 naira per minute of airtime, and then most people are actually using data to make their calls.
And you think the same thing can happen with petrol?
Absolutely, because we have the crude, we have sweet crude. The API of Nigerian crude is quite high, which means they are light crude and they are easy to refine. The cost of refining Nigerian crude is quite lower compared to heavy crude, which then means that once we deregulate the market, we're going to refine, you're going to have refineries that will set up here, refine, buy Nigerian crude at international market prices, refine them and sell to the market. And once competition comes in, supply will outstrip demand and prices will moderate, which is what we have had with the telecommunication sector. Nobody will imagine that from 150 naira, which was more than $1 then, because dollar was about 118 naira to $1, that today we're dealing with 4 naira per minute. And just compare that to maybe less than 20 naira per minute in most instances for those who are still on pay as you go. But the reality is that a deregulated downstream oil and gas sector will lead to investment flowing into that sector, will lead to multiple refineries being established, and will lead to competition. And that will even do a lot of things good for the economy, beyond the fact that we could actually develop to the point we begin to export refined petroleum products, which is outside our OPEC quota. We will also develop our petrochemical industry, we'll develop our pet industry, and several other byproducts of the refinery industry.
I guess the challenge is how to get the people now to accept, to cope with the initial inconveniences, especially in terms of price going up, and how the government handles that, especially with the labor unions too. Well, how the government handles that will determine how successful it will be, because we know the labor unions are insisting that they're not going to accept this. But we just have to wait and see. Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director, Cowrie Asset Management, thank you very much for your time, sir, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir. All right, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be discussing politics. Don't go away. Stay with us. Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal. How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
President must see himself as the President of the Federal Republic.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians are saying in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, and use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI360, dissecting the issues.